Welcome, everyone, to StabilityHub's webinar, Resolving Equipment and Product Concerns, following stability study excursions, fourth in a series sponsored by Parameter Generation and Control, who design and build environmental chambers for industries where conditions must be precise. You can visit them at humiditycontrol.com. We'd ask that you turn your camera on if possible, but stay muted unless you're asked to unmute further to a question. Please use the Zoom chat feature to submit your questions or comments at any time during the event. If desired, you can address your questions to a specific panel member. In the absence of your questions, we've assembled an interesting array of frequently asked study recovery questions. Today's topic addresses stability study excursion recovery from the viewpoint of the user, and our panel includes stakeholders that contribute greatly to various aspects of the process. The session is being recorded and will be available in the articles and videos section at StabilityHub.com. And I'm advancing slides, but they're not advancing. Here we go. So I'd like to introduce today's panelists. We have Emily Dickinson, Director of Quality Assurance at Linical, Ken Edwards, Consultant at Concentric Bioservices, Monica Edwards, Manager at Precision Stability Storage, Dylan Hopper, Service Manager at Parameter Generation and Control, Maria Krish, Research Fellow, Physical Sciences at Freethink Technologies, Emily O'Neill, former Continuous Improvement Specialist and now Senior Onboarding Manager at Regeneron, myself, a lifelong stabilitarian, PSGG's facilitator and editor at StabilityHub, and Walter Routh, founder and CEO of Sagana Quality Consulting, ex-AbbVie Stability Director and Associate Editor at StabilityHub. And let's get started with today's presentation. Questions are welcome via the chat feature throughout the session, but please match your questions to the appropriate segments of the slides. So when it comes to excursions, it's not a matter of if, but when. They will happen. And we wanted to target 4 different types of excursions to go just beyond the traditional stability chamber excursions that we're all used to. There can also be those that are instigated through some kind of a failure in communication or mechanics with facilities and infrastructure. It might be induced by a human error, putting samples in the wrong place that has a significant impact, or else a force of nature, as we've experienced in recent times with hurricanes and fires and tornadoes, earthquakes among those. What could go wrong? Well, with regard to chambers and the spelling of the word wrong, how far and how long did an excursion go? Was it revolving around temperature, too hot, too cold? Was it humidity, too wet, too dry? Did it involve light exposure, wavelength too short, too long, or too unplugged? With regard to facilities, the exterior temperature and humidity of the room being out of specs, possible water shutdown or out of quality specs, electric power shutdown or failure without backup, and possible leaks or interior flooding of chamber or stability area. All possible things for the facilities folks. There could be human error. Something could be mislabeled and then therefore tested under the wrong identity. It might be misplaced or misdirected so it doesn't reach the analytical or microbiology lab at the right moment and have a lot more time on its clock. It could be misreported. It might be one sample being reported as another under a wrong identity or wrong temperature station. Could be accidental over-testing or destruction. Sometimes we lose samples when we do not intend to. Could be the force of nature. I mentioned some of these a moment ago, and an additional one is the pandemic. Nothing at all wrong with the facility, yet the employees couldn't show up, and therefore be a threat to what's going on inside your program. It needs to be said, though it's not in the scope of this presentation, that prevention is way easier than recovery. And we want to do things like make risk assessments, have advanced remediation of potential problems, involving planning and practicing, drilling, and drilling to to make sure that we try to avoid these kind of things that cause an excursion. But excursions, as we said, will happen. But if any way you can prevent those excursions, it's well worth your time. We want to develop a response and recovery plan, and that would involve things like detection, communication, responses, preservation, documentation, remediation, reporting, and lessons learned and update of your plan. So this is a detailed way that you're going to put down in advance on how you would respond, who is going to be involved, when it will happen, and what kind of documentation you will have. And we'll go into each of these a little bit more deeply as the program evolves. Plan for all routes of study excursion. Have a written plan in advance what to do for our chamber excursions, the facility problems, the human errors, and the force of nature damage. But at the time of the excursion, develop your recovery plan to that specific event. So every time you have something, it might be a little bit different, a little bit new, and you want to be ready for that. So make sure that when it happens, you take note of anything that changes, what's going on, and any changes you'll need to make in your plans. And then speaking of planning, I'll take this opportunity to invite those who are new to StabilityHub to visit our website, not right now, but later on, at stabilityhub.com and check out our featured publications, regulations, events, suppliers, our interactive forum, job opportunities, and more. While there, be sure to sign up on the drop-down form for our monthly newsletter to see what's new. As part of the Pharmaceutical Stability Discussion Group, PSDG for short, StabilityHub is planning to returning to live PSDG meetings May 17th through 19th in 2026. That will be in the Raleigh, North Carolina area, where attenders can spend parts of 3 days asking questions, sharing information, touring facilities, meeting vendors and their services, and networking to gain lifelong professional contacts and friends. We're looking for companies in the U.S. that would like to host future meetings at their facilities. If you would like to learn more about meeting or hosting such a meeting, send an email to https://stabilityhub.com/contact. And now back to the presentation. So we have an excursion. Who are we going to call? Well, those folks would be generally stability stakeholders, those ones that surround us in our duties as stabilitarians. A lot of different folks we've identified in past presentations, over 30 of these kind of groups that are around us. So you want to establish relationships and joint planning with them in advance. Make sure you have the names and numbers, the availability of people, and the actions that they're going to take that will be in your plans. And your emergency should be described in their plans so they know what to do as well. When you call up and say, hey, I got a problem, they can turn to such and such a procedure and start going right there. And they also should be training on those kind of things as well. I want to look at the role of some of the key stability stakeholders. And each one of these is represented by a panel member. With regard to quality, they review the circumstances and involve them in the recovery plan. We'll turn to Emily Dickinson to see if she can tell us a little bit about the role of quality. What is the largest or longest time you would allow samples to be an excursion before being required to initiate a formal deviation and investigation versus some other minor documentation? So what can you tell us about that, Emily?
Typically when it comes to reporting excursions like this, it would be covered in your deviation SOP or your laboratory investigation OP. So there's typically a reporting time frame, whether it's 24 hours or 48 hours. So my recommendation, always go by what's in your SOP, but you need to involve quality as soon as you discover an incident. So even if it's just a minor incident where you just need to do an incident documentation in your QMS, keeping quality aware of those things will help. One, it helps build that relationship and that confidence with your QA group that you're gonna to lean on them for guidance. But also, in the event that you have a product that is currently either on the market or or possibly involved in some of their sort of regulatory filing, there may be certain things that need to be reported within a time frame that isn't necessarily covered in your lab deviation SOP. So making sure that QA is involved early on in the process helps with not only the investigation piece, but also any kind of CAPA generation that comes out of it.
Okay. I would imagine when something's going wrong in your chamber, if you noticed on the very first slide, there was flames in the chamber that we intended that to be a little bit humorous, but there actually was one time when somebody reported that they had a fire in their chamber. That's probably why many of our chambers now have sprinkler systems against our will. But in all the hubbub running around and stuff, we probably could forget to be calling quality unless we put it in our procedure as one of our early checks. So I'd advise that. Well, thank you for that, Emily. Before we continue on to the calibration, we have a question about covering shipping temperature excursions, informations, and best practices. And that's not on a slide here, but we can take a moment to address it. And generally, shipping is something you either want to cover over with a validation run or two, so you know pretty much what's going to happen. But a large number of cases really would involve using something like a temp tail or something even more sophisticated. There's a lot of products out there these days to make sure that you see what's going on and you know exactly what excursion did happen, and then address it exactly the same way you would as if it was in a chamber. For the rest of the time, we'll be covering those kind of things, but in reporting, responding, that kind of thing. But it's always good to make sure that you know what happened in those excursions. Sometimes we put in instrumentation that gets read at the destination. They can take one of our instruments and plug it into a computer and generate some graphs and see right then and there exactly what happened, if anything, to their product. I kind of like that one the best. You don't have to wait. I remember in the early days, we moved an entire stability location and we put a lot of charts and recorders, and I think we had some temp tails, but there were some severe vibrations. And by the time that we got to our destination, all the graphs were just spaghetti because every time we hit a pothole or a bump in the road, we lost data or generated data that wasn't true. It was all pothole data. So use the best kind of equipment that you can and can afford in monitoring those shipping things. Okay, let's go to calibration and requalification. If we have a problem with our chamber, lots of times we'll do something to that chamber, try and bring it back, and it might involve some new pieces of equipment or some new settings. Want to make sure to notify those groups that are involved in calibration and qualification, validation, those kind of things, to be in readiness to bring equipment back into service. Let's turn to Ken Edwards and ask if there's a guideline that you use regarding this, or how fast should you consider requalification, and what triggers a requalification versus saying it's just a simple small excursion that really had an insignificant impact.
So I ended up developing a list here, so I'm going to kind of go down the list. So as far as a guideline or standard that should trigger requalification, yes, there are industry expectations and regulatory aligned best practices, but there is no single document that outlines when an excursion should be requalified. Some examples, though, are 21 CFR Part 11, the EU Annex 15 Qualification and Validation, and ICH Q9 Risk Management. But the ICH Q9 is risk-based assessment. Hold on, there's no, it doesn't say that an excursion requires requalification. So when requalification is required, if there's a critical major change that impacts the validated state, a major maintenance repair has taken place. A big one here is if the system is relocated or modified in a way that could impact the airflow, the load itself, or the controls of the system.
Okay, well, thank you, Ken. And I would imagine that probably is a team kind of effort with quality and the stabilitarians and those folks to kind of define what each one of those points you brought up is going to look like at your own company as well. So always good to be in planning and putting that in the plan as to what those parameters are based on some of the things you just brought out. With regard to analytical and microbiology labs, scheduling ad hoc testing of impacted samples, as well as arranging monitoring of future data for long-term impact of the excursion. I've had some experience in those kind of things, and one of the biggest concerns is how many samples are you going to have to use if you're going to do extra testing. So planning to have a few of those in advance. I know that some FDA inspectors have asked why there are so many samples there. Do we intend to commit a fraud by retesting things? Which was not the case. It was simply to meet these kind of emergencies. So defining that in your procedures and your inventory, saying exactly what those samples are for, and perhaps saying that they will not be used except in these defined circumstances would be helpful to allay the concerns of an auditor as they come through. I'm thinking with regards to microbiology as well, we can try to identify whether or not a sample integrity of the package was impacted or any kind of temperature change that made a tremendous difference that we suspect we might need to do some microbiological testing. Let's take a look at manufacturing. We want to notify manufacturing for the possibility of needing replacement batches of samples in case that tactic I just described does not fit the bill. So we need to know whether or not more samples are available. Are they holding things on a routine basis back in the manufacturing plant? Or will they be manufacturing more samples should we need to replace that entire batch due to an excursion? So if it's pertinent to review the involvement of a generation of an excursion with them. And I found it helpful in one company I was at, we had some teams, called them the stability team as opposed to the stability group. And the stability team are all the people you see here on the list. We gave them a sense of ownership and we copied them in on a lot of our communications so that they felt like they were aware of what was going on in stability. And because we knew those people and how they operated, they always were watching our backs and let us know if they had samples, didn't have samples, when the next batches were scheduled to be made, or if there was a change in those schedules. We always noted that, and that was very important. So I would say the key here is to make sure that manufacturing has a representative on your team, as it were, and is communicating with you on a regular basis. With regard to CDMOs, companies we use from time to time, or all the time in some cases, to store our samples and perhaps also test our samples. If something happens with them or with our product and they need to be aware that some of our circumstances have changed, we want to be able to review those circumstances. But we do have some CDMO representatives with us. We have Monica Edwards is from Precision Stability Storage. Monica, do you have any key points about being a CDMO and communicating with the clients?
Well, ours is a little bit different because we do not test. So we store only. So whenever we are doing like chamber excursions, we're very conservative. We have a 2-hour, if it goes over 2 hours, we're contacting the client. So the way that we do our excursion forms is that if it's temperature and humidity, from 25 to 40 C, we take the mean kinetic temperature from our monitoring system for 30 days and provide that information. If it's 5 C, we do it for 24 hours. So whenever we do our excursion forms, we include that information along with the product that's impacted. So we're providing that to our client. So if they do have test results that come back, they'll have all the information. Whenever we set projects up, we have a sheet that we send them and say, hey, we do a 2-hour. Do you want to change that to your excursion period? 99% of the time they are fine with 2 hours. Even though, industry standard is, like Emily said, 24 to 48 hours. But I think that, they just want to, if they have failures, know that, hey, this could have possibly affected it.
Thank you. And Maria, Chris, you're a different type of CDMO. Do you have anything else to add or another aspect of that when it comes to excursions?
Yep. So we're actually, as I said, also kind of a different approach. So we also don't do analytical testing, but my company does accelerated predictive modeling of stability. So we sell software that does that, and then we also do studies for clients. But it's essentially used as an alternate approach to assessing the impact of an excursion. And the heart of it is a stability model based on empirical data. It's a very highly stressed temperature, highly stressed humidity range, short-term experimental data. We use modified Arrhenius modeling and basically get a model of product stability in packaging that covers a wide range of conditions. Those conditions almost always cover whatever you're going to see in a typical excursion. We're usually going higher temperature and higher humidity than anything would normally see. And because of that, some of our clients, especially the software clients, often use those models as the basis of their stability SOP. The advantage is that you can assess the impact with a knowledge of the excursion without doing immediate testing. Because basically you would plug, if you've already done a model of shelf life and you say, okay, I have a prediction that it will pass at 2 years, you can plug the new excursion conditions into that model and say, okay, maybe there's been an impact of the excursion. I used to have a 99% probability of passing. Now I have a 96% probability of passing. If that's still above your criteria in the SOP, and like a common one is 95% probability of passing at the end of shelf life, you can make the assessment that yes, this is considered okay. And so it reduces the need for fast testing, and also can sort of guide decisions when there's a clear change in degradant level, but it's still fine at the end of shelf life. So again, sort of a sideways way to approach it, but a lot of companies do use our software as the basis for these stability excursions. And also, I know there was a shipping excursion mentioned earlier. It's used for that as well.
Aha. While we have you on camera and speaking, can you also tell us anything about the impact of multiple excursions in the same study? Is that something that can be addressed? So none of them might trigger an alarm, but they're all there. They registered and the company knows about them. Is there anything can be done about that? That sometimes is a question by auditors, although not often an observation.
Yep. I mean, a modeling approach can basically treat multiple excursions as easily as one. So it really doesn't change anything from the modeling approach. You simply put all of them in and look at the cumulative impact at the end of shelf life. So yeah, it's basically about as easy to do multiple as it is to do one.
Great. Well, thank you. Let's move on to things like continuous improvement, which is one of our stakeholders that we've noted over the years. But only a few companies have this particular feature. And we're fortunate to have Emily O'Neill with us today, and she's led a team of that in the past. And I wanted to ask Emily, how does the continuous improvement team help the situation when we have excursions and are trying to work our way through recovery?
Yeah, so I think if you are lucky to have a continuous improvement team, they really can be that neutral party to bring a cross-functional team together, like the panel that we have here, to really help understand, what the root cause or causes, because you may have multiple causes that are happening, to understand the root cause and really start working with that same team to identify the potential countermeasures to prevent this in the future. Your CI team really can, start to collect that current state, what really happened in the moment, getting input from folks in the excursion, getting input from the likes of our facilities team, and then bringing both that information that they've collected and the group together to really go through and have the CI team facilitate that root cause problem solving exercise. So that's really where they're going to understand, using tools like the 5 why, the fishbone, to really understand where the breakdowns might have been. And then using the power of the team to really understand and prioritize which countermeasures or which root causes probably are the ones to go after. And working with that team to also brainstorm on which, countermeasures can be the most successful going forward. You might have multiple root causes, so you may have, a situation where you might need to have a fix in facilities, but also there may be opportunities to kind of, and we'll talk about it probably in a couple minutes, but retrain or, implement some opportunities to, can we error-proof the situation, right? Can we only put samples in a certain way so that the wrong samples aren't going into, our studies? Is there a way to, symbol code, or we try to stay away from color coding, obviously, for color blindness, but is there a code that, will help kind of prevent some of this stuff in the future? So your CI team really is that neutral party that can bring everybody together and really help you root cause and figure out what the best solutions might be for going forward. I think your CI teams also, we briefly touched on prevention, but your CI team also is a way to kind of help you, identify some of your situations before they even happen. In certain ways, your CI team can help you institute process walks or leader walks where your staff is really starting to raise those issues that they're seeing in their locations before they happen. So, or leveraging things like a stand-up meeting, right? Stand-up meeting's great for talking about what needs to be accomplished, what was accomplished, and maybe what's getting in the way. And those, again, are just flags to start to be, areas where we may need to start to look at so we are avoiding excursions in the future. So again, just a couple opportunities where our CI team can kind of help you guys have fresh eyes on a situation.
Thank you. And I would imagine if you didn't have a CI team, that maybe a quality unit could step in and do
Yes.
some similar things as well.
Yeah.
We have Walter Routh is stirring the pot here and saying, a question: if the root cause came down to simple equipment age, but there is no budget for at least a few years to replace this unit or purchase additional ones, what recourse do we have other than to keep documenting and putting Band-Aids on? Well, Walter, you touched on a long period of the story of my career. With chambers that kept aging out and finally were not even able to be requalified because they failed it every time. And I think the advice I would offer is to keep on bringing it up, accompanied by any kind of citations that you can find online of other companies that had inadequate equipment. Keep a sail in the gates of the budgeting department to make sure that you try and get out of several years ahead of it to do that, and just keep knocking on doors and putting your warning over and over again. Because at the point where we could no longer re-qualify our chambers, my manager came to me and said, how could you have let this happen? And I started dragging out email after email, appeal after appeal. And that was the only way that we actually won them to do something, was that we didn't let it happen. They let it happen. So that's my answer. If anybody has any others, you're welcome to contribute.
I will say I had a very successful campaign to get new stability chambers when I took the average pricing from storage centers and compared it to a new chamber and presented that to my management to demonstrate that yes, although it was a larger upfront cost initially, that cost over time was significantly higher if we had to contract out storage.
Or the loss of the entire project through some kind
Yep.
of mishap that would be really serious. Let's pick up on the human error reduction factor here as well on this particular slide. Things like automation, redundancy, digitalization, that's taking all your digitized things and linking them together through your computer system, involving more effective practices that Emily brought up. And the use of artificial intelligence going forward can be very helpful. And we're just starting to plug into that now. With regard to maintenance, they should be a strong ally. And the maintenance department can review the incident, go over the maintenance records and preventive maintenance program. We want to make sure we put them in communication with the equipment provider in order to make sure that they have the right pieces and parts. Sometimes they need to store those if it's a piece of equipment that you can overlook, and it takes a while to get in. It's nice to identify this failed twice in the past. We think it's going to fail in the future. Let's stick one on our shelf so we have a 1 hour turnaround time instead of a overnight or a couple of days to do that. So that's great to involve them in that. And then related to that, the facilities department, reviewing and remediating any contributory factors within the purview of facilities. They're the folks that can turn off the water down the hallway because they have a project going and not realize that the stability chambers needed that water, and then suddenly it's going to cause all the humidity to go way out of the specifications. They also might have something to do with turning off the power or that kind of thing. So having them as a subscriber to your communications and you to theirs, knowing exactly when they're going to shut things down. And I've done that successfully in the past, made friends in the facilities department that they always thought of us as soon as they were going to do anything, and would reassure us that, no, this isn't going to touch your operation, or yes, you need to do something different for this particular period of time. And the further in advance that you know that, the better off you are. Equipment providers, you can solicit their analysis of, where practical, of what your situation is. They can make recommendations for repair, preventative maintenance, or replacement. Let's see, do we have anybody from Parameter that would like to comment on that? We're sure that we had them this morning.
Yeah, my name's Dylan. I'm from Parameter. Yeah, a big one is definitely focusing on the preventative maintenance and understanding what the air handler unit is conditioning. Some places it's at a paper factory, and then some places it's just at in a lab. And so understanding that preventative maintenance is key, and making sure that you set up a preventative maintenance contract with somebody in your area regularly. But also the big one is having a contingency plan for not only parts, because we have struggled, especially with some of our older units, sourcing parts. If something goes down, it might be a 6 to 8 week lead time, and that is a big problem. And so having a parts list and having some of the, having the understanding of when those might fail and having a contingency plan there. But what's further than that is also knowing who your subcontractors in that area might be and who might be sent out to help you out, and developing those relationships. Those are two big ones.
Great, thank you, Dylan.
Mhm.
Some longer term stakeholders in the process of recovering from an excursion involve statistics, having conferences with them to support with their professionals for trending and analysis of data. And Emily, you're kind of representing our statistics expert today. Can you comment on the role of statistics on when you get involved and what kind of things you might be looking for when it comes to excursions? Emily Dickinson.
Yeah, so as far as statistics are concerned, typically you want to know, if your product is behaving normally. What are those confidence intervals look like? So is this excursion going to impact how well that product is going to be able to stay within the designated shelf life based on your confidence intervals? When I was in the lab, which was a very long time ago, doing stability testing, I really relied on the extrapolation piece for any kind of excursion. So if we had an excursion, depending on the duration, we may pull an interim time point to make sure that that product being stored wasn't necessarily impacted, and then take that data and plug it into our extrapolation model to see if there was going to be any additional impact. But it sounds like, Maria, with some of the advancements with FreeThink, the old school way of doing things has been replaced by something much fancier.
I think it's an alter. I think probably much more commonly what you're describing is what's used, but I think this is a use that certain companies do. But yeah, they essentially both use statistics just in different ways.
Yeah.
Sounds good. And I think that speaks to the need to have a good relationship with people who are zeroed in on stability statistics. I've been privileged to have a statistician directly on my stability group staff, and that was fantastic. There's other times where there was a separate group within the company, and very privileged if one or two of those were specialized in stability statistics. But sometimes they're not. Sometimes you just go in and they give you an assignee by the luck of the draw, and then they're kind of scrambling to figure out exactly what to do with your data. So if you can start to cultivate a relationship with the statisticians and make sure that there's one or two that are really familiar with stability statistics, lobby for them to go to seminars and webinars on the topic so that they really can zoom in on your needs. That's fantastic to do. Stability Review Committee. This is something that was new back when I was new to stability. They were just start forming these kind of organizations. They're generally multidisciplinary, that brings everybody to the table, from the analytical people to the manufacturer to statisticians and analytical folks, all kinds of people involved in the Stability Review Committee. And the advantage is that they can take a multidisciplinary approach to looking at excursions, investigations, the conclusions, and the remediation, and kind of give you a nice broad range, much like we're doing here, of everybody's input, what we should be thinking about, what they can bring to the table, where they can lift some typical bureaucratic barriers and improve the process as they go along. So in conjunction with QA, they can bring an effective multidisciplinary approach to addressing each excursion. And when enough is enough, and just the voice of the stabilitarian saying we need to discontinue the study doesn't cut it with management, all these things speaking as one often achieves that objective, that they really overcome administrative objections when everybody's lined up shoulder to shoulder saying this is the way we should go. And we've experienced that in the past as well. So if you can either form a stability review committee or utilize yours, make sure that they're on board for looking at excursions and those kind of things to do. And then the element of training. Will the training group need to review procedures and revise training materials and initiatives? And then is there a continuous improvement program? And Emily represents having a foot in each one of these, Emily O'Neill. If you wanted to speak to training and what's involved there, I know training is not always the answer to everything, but can you give us an aspect on that?
Yeah, I think we do need to, as you said, John, we need to caution on, it is easy for us to default to retrain the operator, right? Retrain the individual who was in the excursion. I do think that there is also great opportunity in looking at our training as a whole, right? Has that SOP been updated a million times and the steps are so out of whack now, or do you have to go from the top to 4 appendix, to find exactly what you need? We've done, from a CI perspective, we have looked at some of our SOPs more in the manufacturing space, but they're like 50 pages. How is someone supposed to follow that? So, take a look, make sure that your SOPs are following, logically what steps somebody needs to take, and sometimes that's hard because you're trying to rush to get some of this stuff updated, but the rush has created a document that might not be usable anymore. And, do you have work instructions or job aids that can kind of help supplement? But also think about your training program as a whole, right? Are we just relying on our written documentation as the learning vehicle, right? Think for us today, like if you go in and try to put in a load of laundry and all of a sudden a weird code pops up, are you going to go in your junk drawer and look for your 100-page manual to see what that code is? No, you're going to pull open your phone in YouTube. What is this code on my Samsung washer, right? So think about, are there ways to create, snippet module learnings for folks that are starting up a study? Hey, watch out for these areas. These are excursion areas that we've seen in the past, right? Just to proactively get them in the right mindset and refreshed on any of those human, based potential opportunities that went wrong, to kind of make sure that they're moving forward in the right direction.
Thank you. That's very helpful.
Yeah.
We often think of a training group as a distant body of people that just crank out documents that we have to sign off on and review again. But it's great when they're proactively involved and thinking about these things for us. So that's fantastic. Before we leave this page, Walter has given us a question. Is it then advisable regarding statistics to insert additional intervals to have sufficient data points to detect if there was impact? Or is the risk associated with those added intervals not worth it? And this is a great question that we often think about. Do we immediately want to throw more data in and to save the study and let people know almost immediately following an excursion that they have nothing to worry about? Or is it possible that you have nothing to worry about now, but you've kind of changed the activity of the product a little bit so that later on you're going to have a different kind of outcome? Emily Dickinson, can you comment on that part of the thing about adding data points?
Yeah, and I would say it depends. One, I think it would depend on the duration and the extreme of the excursion. So are you really going to gain that much information? But on the flip side of that, and this is where I'm going to play devil's advocate to the inclusion of additional data points, if you're early in your product stability program and you haven't necessarily done some of those excursion studies or your shipping studies going back to the first question of the session, that data point can actually prove more valuable than just showing the stability of that specific lot. It can generate data that could be used to support your shipping excursions. If you've got a refrigerated product, it can help support any kind of time out of refrigeration that's needed for product processing. So depending on the excursion, it might be worth it to look and see if adding additional time points to that study is necessary. Or maybe it's even worth it looking into doing a specialized study for that product or a group of products to determine longer term impact once you go through that kind of cycling activity.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to move to a summary slide here, but that doesn't mean that we're at the end. We have a big chunk of space that we can address a lot of different questions from the audience. So if you want to bring any kind of your issue forward in the chat there, please do that while you're thinking about this. And then we have other questions that we can bring to our panelists as we go through the program. In summarization, we want to be sure to assess the risk involved in our excursions. What does it mean that they happened? What do we have to fix? What's the chance of it happening again? And what's the chance that our remediations might fail? We want to initiate prevention in all practical ways so we don't have the excursion, or at least we don't have a repeat of it. So looking to all our stakeholders as to what they can do. And we've seen a wonderful array of input here from our panelists today and what they can do for us. So if you've not availed yourself of all those ways within your company, please start exploring that. Go make contact with the people. We have entire presentations on how to establish relationships with various departments, to look at their SOPs, to make sure they look at your SOPs, that their people are trained in knowing what to do and how to react. Plan in detail for all conceivable excursion types. As we mentioned, we don't often think of human error. We think of chambers mostly, but can also be some kind of disaster planning that causes disasters that cause excursions, and we want to plan to navigate around those, involving those stakeholders in the communications and those planning processes. Practicing scenarios on a regular basis. You might see your first aid squads at work running down the hallway with their first aid bags and have a victim lying in the hallway that's playing the part of somebody who had an incident. We can do that with our stability process as well. We don't have to run down hallways, but we do need to have some plans. We do need to walk through them and say, oh, I hadn't anticipated that this could happen, to block our process. There's a department there that needs to be communicated with that we missed. There's some kind of requirement that we didn't see. So run through your plans and make sure that they're actually going to work. And then to update and continuously improve as excursions occur. and revise your plans to incorporate any of those things that are a surprise to you. So that takes us to the possibility of other things for questions, discussions, your experiences. What's on your mind? What do you think we missed? What memorable study excursions have you had? What went right or wrong with dealing with them? And whatever questions you have for us left over, we'd be glad to entertain. And while we're doing that, I will ask a few other questions. I was going to ask Emily Dickinson, are there any contingency plans that exist within statistics departments that use the established statistics to quickly address events such as stability excursions? So rather than waiting for somebody to come along a month later, have you ever seen anybody be proactive in that area where they say, I heard there was an excursion. We know that as a QA person, you wanted to be notified early, so maybe there's a connection there. I was thinking at the time, the earliest notification you would get would be to be hooked into the alarm system. But having spent a good deal of my life doing that, there was times where 2 o'clock in the morning, if I wasn't absolutely needed on the scene, I didn't mind not being notified until I actually arrived at the office the next day. But for when it comes to statistics, is there any early activities that the statisticians can take? Should we ask them to be prepared?
I think that that's a great idea. When I was in the lab, we didn't really have a statistics department. We had one woman in the infancy of bringing in JUMP to help do some modeling, but um, I think it's a good idea. Maybe not have them on speed dial and get all of the alarms, because I can remember working in the lab when I got my first company issued phone and I was tied into the alarm system. The thing would be going off at all hours. So I wouldn't I wouldn't recommend that for someone on the statistics side. But it's definitely a good idea. I mean, running to Maria's point, running those models, knowing how your product behaves, I think that's really the first thing that you need to do is really understand the degradation pathways for your product, understand how it behaves on stability, understand what different environmental conditions or handling conditions can either exacerbate degradation or cause it to slow if that's what you're expecting. So I think it's kind of a combination thing. So you have your statistics team that understands the math behind that process, but then you also have your process developers that understand the ins and outs of the product as well.
Mhm. Well, thank you. Let's go to Dylan Hopper and ask, is there anybody, a particular position at the equipment supplier's place? Is there a title, perhaps it's yours, but maybe not, that we should have on our speed dials when we have an excursion? Who should we be approaching within the supplier's company to get the fastest responses?
Yeah, I would suggest definitely having so I'm the service manager. Having someone like that on speed dial is a great thing because oftentimes, like myself, I've been working with these machines for a long time, and so I'm able to kind of troubleshoot over the phone and really kind of guide people through some of their issues and hopefully prevent them needing somebody to come out on site, but also that is going to be the person that can determine, who ought to get there and be able to tell you how fast they'll be able to, but also to chase the thing I had said earlier is coming up with a contingency plan for when these things go down is huge. Making sure that you have the components that might fail, making sure you have them on hand, and also, again, having a good relationship with the subcontractor in your area, because it could be that maybe we're having trouble getting in touch with somebody or whatever it might be, and if the guys that usually come out, it's good to have them on speed dial and to have a good relationship with them as well.
And while we have you here, Does the supplier typically have an idea of what I'll call it the shelf life, it's a term we use a lot for our products, of a part that you expect to have a shelf life of maybe 10 years and the rest of your equipment is good for 20? Do you typically track that kind of thing and follow what parts might be due for a replacement? Or is that
Yeah.
something that the client is responsible for because you told them that when they purchased?
Yes, that is, and that's something that we're trying to really be proactive about is getting those, not only the parts list, but the how long they might last. And we do, at least on our end, have a good idea of how long certain parts might last. And we've had that list sort of compiled so that when we sell a unit and we do, the install and the startup and then the operator training, kind of the final piece is, okay, here's your parts list, and here's how long certain ones tend to last. And another thing that I'd like to try and add in there, and maybe I'm just kind of beating a dead horse here, is lead times for certain components, because that changes all the time, as do prices on those components. And so, yes, we do have those lists, and it is important to kind of push those to the customer because it can really help a lot.
Okay, and a question on the chat came up. Is there a way for the vendor to see and diagnose issues remotely? Do you ever plug into a company to see their outputs on their chambers? I think that might be a wave of the future, but maybe I'm behind the times on that.
As far as I understand it, that is something that we are working towards developing. We have felt the pains of going from what is like our smart pad, which runs off of ACE boards, and there's a bunch of tiny little components that can be incredibly difficult to source. And so now we're shifting to this 10-inch touchscreen with all of our newer units. And from there, we're trying to put in more sort of monitoring systems for not only what your unit is doing, but also to kind of maybe alert you about, oh, your compressor is kind of running funny, or whatever it might be. And so there are some ways. We haven't fully developed that. It's something that we're looking towards. A lot of times, the biggest thing is just to get somebody on the phone. I mean, I talked to a guy yesterday, and he was wanting to buy some heaters from us. And then he just in passing had mentioned that every winter, they have a heater go down, and a heater goes down once a month. And it was very strange. But we dove into it. I kind of asked him a bunch of questions, and finally was able to, we sent some pictures back and forth, and I was able to determine that his damper blade was in the wrong position. And so essentially, when the unit is trying to heat up, the air should be going directly to the heater, and then it's concerned about RH. Well, with the way that the damper had been installed, it could never allow the air from the room to bypass the process spray and go straight to the heater. And so what was happening is that his heater's just burning 100% all the time, and they weren't running a very difficult condition. But that's why they weren't calling us about issues necessarily, that their unit wasn't able to maintain condition. It was, but in certain months, it was having to strain a good deal more, and it was causing it to burn out. And we figured that out over the phone. And so, it's great to have emails and conversations like that. But one thing that can really help a lot is just a phone call, some pictures, maybe a video call, something like that. And so, yeah, we're looking to try and get more stuff so that we can monitor that stuff. But that's kind of my input there.
Very good. Thank you. I became aware in the past year that there's another provider, not of equipment, but more of a monitoring kind of thing, where they, it'd be the equivalent of driving down the road in your car and having the check engine light come on, or maybe be a little bit more specific about what part of the engine. So they're manufacturing a override system kind of thing that monitors what the various parts in your chamber are doing, give you early warning. And that sounds like it'd be a great partner for manufacturers to be able to see what's going on a little bit more specifically. So take a look at the possibilities out there. If your chambers are starting to get old and you need to do something, either establish a relationship with the provider or else go into some tighter monitoring that can give you some early warnings, much like Dylan was saying. Okay, let me move on to one for Monica with regard to stability CDMOs. And I should mention that we're planning at the beginning of next year to do a CDMO kind of meeting, much similar to this, only that will be our topic for stability CDMOs. But this particular question would be, if you're not storing samples in large quantities for a client, can clients make arrangements to use you as an emergency backup facility should their normal equipment go down and they need to move quickly? I would hate to be a CDMO supplier and somebody knocks on my door without any advance arrangements, but are those kind of arrangements possible that they simply will alert you that they would like to do storage under certain conditions? Is that possible?
Yes, we do have people reach out to us and use us in their risk. We've got a chamber right now that has been on hold for a client for about 3 months because they are doing a new install. So they've got older machines. They want to make sure if something happens that they'll have space. If it is a large amount of space, we do kind of ask, do you want to put this on hold kind of thing. But, anything under like 100 cubic feet, we can probably handle, that. We have had a client that's across the street from us that's a lab, and their entire chamber went down, and we were moving stuff across the street, at like 6 o'clock in the afternoon. So we do that's part of our business model, that we are, backup, contingency for emergencies.
Okay, thank you. I'm glad to hear that is something that people can turn to if they're not ready to commit to long-term storage or continuous storage, they can use CDMOs on a emergency basis. So that's good. Another question that's been forwarded in the past has to do with if you have prolonged excursions, but very small ones. And based on mapping results, you can show that half the chamber was not actually out of range, but the alarms are set based on the worst case mapping locations. Would this work as rationale to limit my product impact bracket? So how do you deal with excursions that are very small along those lines, so they don't necessarily trigger any kind of dramatic responses or extreme responses? So remediations for a low risk outage. Walter, I think this might have been your question. Did you want to comment on it?
Yeah, the main point of the question was just, can you exempt half of your chamber if say, based on your mapping, you can show that a portion of the chamber doesn't look like it was out of range, and you could. It just depends on, is it worth the scrutiny, and can you prove that in fact all of that side of the chamber or that area was really out of within range or not? It can at least it makes a little bit less stress for what might happen in the future if you realize in fact that most of the chamber wasn't out of range, but probably still would want to just go ahead and address everything in the chamber. Ken might have more on that. Is mapping so accurate as to be able to make that kind of assessment?
Hang on, he's reading over the question again.
Actually, we're just about out of time on that, so we'll have to go over to stabilityhub.com for putting any other parts of questions or responses in. But in closing, I wanted to point out some of our schedule coming up. Our time has flown. I'd like to take an opportunity to highlight some of those. So we'd ask that you'd like to join us again on December 11th for a webinar on stability limbs, selection and implementation. It'll be sponsored by Novatech International. January 15th, we'll be addressing everything you wanted to know about stability CDMOs. February 19th, join our annual online celebration of National Medical Product Stability Day with a virtual stability parade, epic stability stories, and a stability panel, much like this one, to answer your questions and suggest solutions to your challenges. And then on May 17th through 19th, we'll call it our triumphant return to in-person PSDG meetings. So it's been off for 5 years now. 3 days of peace, love, and letting the stability discussion roll. Let your management know now that you'd like to attend and request an agenda at stabilityhub.com/contact. Watch for announcements and sign-up links in the future for that in our newsletter and on the website. I want to thank our panel members especially and our sponsor, Parameter Generation Control, for all their valuable input to our program and making this day possible. And you, the audience, the worldwide keepers of the stability function, as well as shelf life of our products, the safety of patients and consumers. Thank you for attending today, and we trust you found it an informative session, and we hope to see you again soon. And with that, we will end our program.